Perfect.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so firstly, I just want to apologise for the incredibly vague title of the presentation. Whenever I was thinking about presenting, I knew I wanted to talk about contact tracing apps, but I didn't know what specific angle I was going to take on the issue. It's kind of tangentially related to my own research, so it's been kind of a quick learning process. Obviously, it's impossible to go into depth on all of the relevant issues in just 10 minutes or thereabouts. So I wanted to focus on a relatively underexplored area, which is the potential of digital surveillance to exacerbate inequality during the pandemic. Okay. So contact tracing has been presented as the key to relaxing lockdown restrictions and an essential step on the path to saving lives and saving livelihoods. So manual contact tracing has been a key component in the response to past health challenges and outbreaks like TB, the Ebola virus, and the general management of STIs. But there's a definite argument to be made that manual contact tracing can't respond quickly enough to coronavirus. And this is partly because people infected with the virus are infectious up to 7 days before the onset of symptoms, and around 47% of transmissions originate from pre-symptomatic individuals. So basically something more than manual contact tracing is necessary to tackle coronavirus, and contact tracing apps might help. So first, some sort of exposition of the general technical principles behind many of these apps. And for any tech people listening, please pull me up if I've misrepresented any of the facts, because it's very possible. So first, the UK app works by Bluetooth proximity tracing, picking up on Bluetooth signals from phones running the app that come near the user and recording how long these interactions are and how far away users are from each other. And I'm going to be focusing mostly on the UK with some international comparisons during this presentation. The UK's centralised system assigns users a persistent identifier upon registration and then ephemeral IDs that change periodically. In the centralised model, it's essentially the state that issues and stores the installation IDs. If an app user enters a diagnosis or even symptoms of COVID-19, the app runs through the phone's list of contacts from the past 3 weeks and assesses each person a risk score based on the degree and duration of proximity, as well as other population level epidemiological factors. So to those deemed at risk, a push notification informs them of the need to self-isolate. In the decentralised model, the software issues installation IDs and refreshed IDs without a central authority, so no authority can connect the two. It's currently not clear whether centralised apps can work with decentralised apps, such as that used south of the border. The issue of interoperability is one big reason why Northern Ireland has so far rejected the UK app, although since it hasn't been fully rolled out yet, there's not much of an app to reject at this point. Most European states have chosen to use the decentralised model, with the exception of the UK and France. This is an issue that's sort of been glossed over by the UK government. It's not entirely clear what will happen when the UK citizens start travelling again, and especially to countries with decentralised systems and vice versa. People could potentially face mandatory quarantine because the government chose an app architecture that's not really interoperable. And there are now reports that the UK is considering switching to Google and Apple's decentralised API. Apparently there have been some issues with the trial in the Isle of Wight, where iPhones can't wake each other up to perform these digital Bluetooth handshakes unless there's an Android device nearby. So this could obviously result in big gaps in the tracing data, since around 40% of UK smartphones run iOS. In general, these technical issues are very serious, and if they remain unresolved, will obviously undermine the UK government's overall test and trace system. Also, it's very important to note that many of these problems that are often presented as purely technical ones also have significant human rights ramifications and the potential to exacerbate social inequality, which I'm going to focus on now. Okay. So uptake and user populations. In order for the UK's contact tracing app to effectively halt the spread of the virus, 80% of smartphone users or 60% of the general population will need to download and use it, which is a huge number. But to be fair, it should also be noted that the app can still work with some success if uptake is lower than this. I keep wanting to say uptake, combine the words app and uptake. I'm sorry if I do. But still, in the UK, 22% of adults don't have a smartphone, and this figure rises to 45% for adults over the age of 55. We already know that older people are the most vulnerable to the worst effects of the virus, and they'll soon face the biggest barriers to taking part in digital contact tracing efforts. So those without access to the app will obviously not receive the same level of benefit in terms of up-to-date information about the risk of infection from contact with others. We should also consider people from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds who are able to use the app and who choose to do so. So in general, people are more likely to form social ties with others in similar social groups, and this is true for low-income workers. Many of these people are called key workers, working on the front lines in retail, health and social care, sanitation and public transport. Because they're much less likely to be able to work from home, they face a much higher likelihood of infection, as we've already sort of seen in the news, and maybe through personal experience. Digital contact tracing will record more contacts of low-income workers than middle-class or high-income earners who enjoy the privilege of working from home. So because low-income workers interact with many more people in a day, a large population of that group will be sent into quarantine. If they're lucky enough not to have come into contact with the virus, they'll likely be asked to self-isolate repeatedly, bearing the social, economic and psychological ill effects that quarantine brings. And this all correlates with UK public opinion on contact tracing apps. So as of 1 week ago, 73% of people in managerial, administrative or professional jobs say they're likely to download the app, which is pretty high, but this is also to be compared with 50% of routine and manual workers, state pensioners and the unemployed. So that's quite a big difference. And the issue of app uptake is undoubtedly directly related to the idea of trust in government, which is a very sort of topical issue. So the UK government has given us all multiple reasons to distrust their approach to halting the spread of the pandemic in recent months, but people from BME backgrounds specifically have long-standing fears about placing their personal data in the government's hands. So we've got the Windrush scandal, which affected individuals who had legally moved to the UK many years ago, with the Home Office holding incorrect data on their immigration status. In many cases, it flew under the radar until the Home Office started sharing this data with other parts of the government, which led to people wrongly being denied services and using it to detain and target people for deportation. Also got the case of the London Metropolitan Police's gang matrix database, which was created in response to the 2011 London riots and has been widely criticised as a racially discriminatory risk management tool. So the matrix takes into account an individual's previous offences, network of friends and social media activity to assign a risk score, red, amber or green, relating to the likelihood of gang membership. So 80% of those on the list are described as African Caribbean, 12% are from other ethnic minority backgrounds, and just 8% are quote unquote white European. The vast majority of all people on the database are considered to pose little threat of violence by even the police. So in general, I think the point of this is that people from minority ethnic groups have very valid reasons to be suspicious about handing over sensitive health-related data to a government with a history of reckless and actively harmful management and processing of data. And that's certainly true in the current age of the Home Office's hostile environment policy. Last month, just the Open Rights Group wrote a letter to Boris Johnson outlining its concerns about data sharing specifically between the NHS and the Home Office, particularly about those with irregular immigration statuses and people in sort of legal limbo. And again, the connection between race and mistrust of government data collection is borne out in public opinion. And thank you to Mark for very helpfully pointing me to this source from Brookings. So you can see here that just 7% of Black respondents were strongly in favour of digital contact tracing apps, compared with 22% of white respondents. And then on the other side, we've got 56% of Latinx respondents who either opposed or strongly opposed the technology, compared with 44% of white respondents. Okay. So as already mentioned, the UK app monitors users' contact with other app users, but not at this point phone location data. But the centralised model means that there's the risk that the amount of monitoring could expand over time quite easily. With the government in control of the app, mission creep is a serious risk, and the app's functions could expand beyond the initial purpose. So firstly, there's the anonymisation of data. So NHSX, which is the digital wing of the NHS, is responsible for the development of the app. NHSX have also stressed repeatedly that the data stored in the centralised database will be anonymous, which isn't technically true. It's pseudo-anonymous data because it's technically capable of being re-identified. So the centralised data collection and use of a master key to generate the installation IDs increases the risk that app users could be re-identified to the device or person. This could happen through expansion of data collection. The Guardian reports that the UK government has already considered whether to build the app with future de-anonymisation in mind, if ministers judge that to be proportionate at some stage. But probably to no one's surprise, why and under what conditions de-anonymisation might be proportionate are currently unclear. The data aren't currently stored next to a name or phone number, but it would be much easier to do this with the centralised system than the decentralised one. So if the app does eventually incorporate location data, this would be a significant step up from Bluetooth. There's also the issue of consent. NHSX have already indicated that in the future it might invite people to send their location data about where they had contact with other individuals. So while NHSX might have the consent of the person donating the data, it would not necessarily have the consent of everyone whose location data would be revealed by that process, if that makes sense. This is important because location data reveals really sensitive identifying information about the private details of our lives, including social networks and relationships, political and religious affiliations, a history of health problems and sexual orientation. So because it's possible to establish this sort of pattern of someone's movements using location-based contact tracing data, it's very likely to be covered by the concept of private life for the purposes of Article 8 of the ECHR. So just as an example, in South Korea, which is a state that's been praised for its comprehensive and effective digital contact tracing strategy, an outbreak cluster recently appeared in a nightclub district in Seoul. So at least 79 cases have been linked to nightclubs and bars that the cluster suspected patient zero visited the previous weekend. This specific district is popular with the LGBTQ community in Seoul, who have little legal protection in South Korea in general, and hate speech and discrimination are quite rife. So the country's digital contact tracing system uses mobile phone location data, and the government actually broadcasts messages about infected individuals' movements via text, which renders any meaningful anonymity almost impossible. And here is a quote from Lee Young-woo, who visited the same outbreak district, speaking to The Guardian. And the UK isn't immune from this either. If the app uses a centralised server and it retains easily de-anonymised information and location data, these could be used by a later government who aren't as friendly towards LGBTQ people. Okay, so I'll just go back to. Of course, linking data with individuals could be done in a much more open way, simply by asking individuals to provide more personal data. NHSX has been pretty open about the possibility of adding more features in the future and collecting more data, but they haven't confirmed anything so far. So Wired magazine gained access to an open unsecured Google Doc that's being used by the NHS that talks about possibly collecting postcodes, demographic and co-location status information from people. And finally on this point, behavioural nudges. So just to return to the main point of mission creep, Wired also reported that Matt Hancock and the UK's Chief Scientific Advisor met with NHSX Chief Matthew Gould to discuss additional app features, including monitoring and enforcement of social distancing measures. So maybe if you're outside for too long or if you're too close to someone else who's using the app, you might get a wee pop-up notification. It was also reportedly consider whether the app could alert users when they spend too long outside, as I said, which I'm not sure how that would work. I guess, yeah, again, I'm not too sure of the technical ramifications of it, but I think an even more worrying example of mission creep could be found in the development of immunity certificates, or immunity passports, as they're also known. Just skip forward. Okay, so it should first be noted that there's currently no robust scientific means of testing immunity. That also applies to antibody testing. I know it's sort of out there, but I don't think the science is completely concrete on that, about whether the presence of antibodies equates to immunity. But it's easy to imagine a scenario whereby the scope of the contact tracing app is expanded, or maybe the app itself is repurposed to serve as proof of immunity from the virus, which would obviously pose huge risks of indirect discrimination. And this is not all pure speculation either. Matt Hancock expressed interest in the use of digital immunity certificates in that same Google Doc that Wired had access to. People talked about the possibility of a COVID-19 status feature for a future version of the app. So users could update their status to one of 5 options: quarantine, self-isolating, social distancing, shielding, and none, which is very nondescript. So on the basis of their status, people might be denied access to public space, services, employment, and status if they're deemed too risky. This all has echoes of China's post-lockdown measures, where apps assign people with a health code. I think one that's quite frequently used in China is Alipay's health code app. So different health codes in China afford people different freedoms, like the ability to travel outside their apartment, to use public transport, or enter restaurants. This is much like the social credit systems used throughout China, which Daithí has written about and which I personally found very helpful during the pre-coronavirus thesis days. So people in the West tend to view these social credit systems and now the health code app as like a sort of Black Mirror dystopian surveillance nightmare. But we often fail to consider how our own government surveillance systems suffer from mission creep, and contact tracing apps look like an excellent example of this so far. And after all, there's no easier time to establish a new normal than during a time of national emergency. So that's all, and thank you very much for